Welcome to Culture Before Content. Culture Before Content, from Music for All and presented by Yamaha. And now, here's your host, David Duarte.
Hey, welcome to Culture Before Content. My name is David Duarte, and I am your host. I hope this is not your first show, but if it is, I hope you enjoy your first show. So I just wanted to say this is a live stream right now, but it's available as soon as we're done. You can watch this live stream on YouTube, or you can wait till tomorrow, and it'll be available on Apple Podcasts, and you can also stream it on Spotify, which reminds me, you can also watch all of our past episodes or listen to all our past episodes as well. So just remember that this is sponsored by Music for All with a special funding by Yamaha, and we appreciate all of that. Our mission statement is to provide, and expand positively life-changing experiences through music, which I hope is what all of us do in our daily life. I'm pretty sure that's pretty much what I want to do with my daily life. So don't forget, if you're watching this show live, like and subscribe. It would be great because then you'll know when the next show comes up. Also, if you're watching later on YouTube, like and subscribe. It's kind of fun because I have it up on all of them. So I kind of get the Spotify, I get the Apple Podcast. I actually have been listening to on all of them. It's kind of interesting to listen to your own voice. And it is quite a bit of a different feel, by the way, when you watch it on video and you get a chance to listen to it live. But take a chance and go ahead and go watch all those shows. I know last week we had Ed Protzman on, and the big thing about his theme is he's new to the area up here, and I just wanted to get the perspective of somebody who's new, building a culture. He went from high school and now he's teaching at college, but there's some really unique thought processes that are going on there. Check it out. So if you're new to the show, you might want to go back. You don't have to watch them in order. It's kind of neat. We had Matt Wood on our first show. He was he's a newer teacher that has spoke how he's built a culture at his program. And then second, we had Scott Lang, who was really got me into a corner about talking about the difference between growth and performance, which is what I hope we're going to talk about a little bit today. Because it is still festival season. We still got bands going. It is spring break season. For those of you who are back from your spring break, welcome back. For those of you on spring break, welcome to some relaxation. And for those of us who haven't got to spring break, we can do this. We can do this. But also, we had Mary Crandall on a few weeks ago, and I had my book sitting over there in the corner, The Building from the Ground Up. I highly suggest you take a look at that book. But before we get started today, I just want to do a couple of shout outs. I always like to do a little bit of a reflection. This last week, I don't feel like I've done anything, but since the last podcast, as I just did a bunch of stuff, and here I am back in the podcast seat again. But last week was really a special one for me. Personally, I got a chance to. It was got to do our festival performance for my band. So it was a bunch of preparing. We had clinicians come out on Monday. My guest who today, it came out last week via Zoom, which we'll talk about on the show. And then I sent out my recordings for evaluation because I had a special little way of doing my festivals here. And then I got the chance to judge this week, which, by the way, the most amazing thing, and I hope we can talk about this as well. When you get a chance to evaluate band programs, you get a chance to hear bands differently because it takes that process of going from what you hear to what you want to give advice to. And my biggest thing is learning to make that correction, not necessarily a correction, but more of a how to make it better, which is the process of what festival provides for us. But Andrew Barley at Tenino High School in Washington, thank you. And by the way, your band was absolutely wonderful. And the big thing about that festival, folks, is it was really smaller bands. It was in Washington, it was 2A bands and smaller. And so that was really special, is that there was so much good teaching going on all over America, and a chance to provide some awesome comments and work with those. Because the neat thing about the festivals, you get to do clinics after them, get to work with those bands. But thank you, Andrew. That was a fantastic experience. And just, wow, the bands in Southwestern Washington, doing some great stuff. And then a final shout out to some friends. I like to read the Facebook posts that come by, and I saw Jennifer York, your small band. She's a 2B band program, which is like, I don't know why in Washington we go 3A, 4A, 3A, 2A, 1A, and it goes 2B, 1B. Got me confused. 2B band program, and she got a Superior Festival this week. And to Amy Gillick, my friend from Austin P University, used to be the double reed professor, has moved out here teaching middle school band, and she got a Superior Festival this week. But good things are happening to good people, and that we're going to talk about the culture of festival prep and the opportunities for growth. So, enough about my week. Let's get to our guest today, because I am extremely excited. My story here is I used to think I was a great teacher when I was younger. And then something happened. I started listening. And partly it was because this gentleman started speaking up, and rather than defend and deflect, after a while, it took some time and I realized everything this man says is right. And when I finally came to that agreement, I finally to start taking awareness of what's going on with my own pedagogy. And I'm sure he will tell you, my bands used to play loud and proud, and I thought that was the greatest thing. But the problem was superiors at festival kind of like helped the problem. And this problem took 15 years of my career to figure out that one day I woke up and said, I'm doing band wrong and I need to make a change. And this gentleman really was instrumental. And it took 2 words. And those words were characteristic tone. And that's what started the process to opening up my own brain to realize that these festivals, this how I teach, how I prepare my band needed to change in order for me to get some of those things. So the thing about it for me was I noticed that the band program next to me, it wasn't about the ratings that the top band was getting. It was about the ratings the lower bands were getting. The second band was getting superior with distinction, and the third band was getting superior with distinction. And that's where I finally kind of stopped and said, what is going on? And when I started to go learn about what this process had to behold, oh my goodness, it just changed me forever. So on the show today, I want to welcome you somebody who is not only a master technician, he does leadership. He is just one of the most fantastic pedagogists I've ever met in my entire life. So please welcome, without any further ado, to the show, Mr. Dave Kuhns.
Well, hello.
Well, hello, Mr. Kuhns. How are you today?
Well, it's 69 degrees in Arizona, so we're a little panicky. It's under 70.
Oh gosh, I'm sure everyone's in their parkas and got their mittens on, and I'm sure everyone's got their little ice things for the windshield.
Yep.
Oh yeah, you got the sweater on, and here I am. It's almost 60 degrees, so I took the sweater off because I'm dying of heat. I'm kidding. I'm not dying of heat here, but all right, Mr. Kuhns, the floor is yours. So I want to start the conversation with, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, I'm a retired band director who spent half of his career doing things wrong. You know, I was listening to your introduction talking about that kind of road to Damascus experience where you thought you have to make some changes. And I had this same experience. It's just, I kept wondering why we do some things the way we do them and have done them that way forever. And then I just started making some decisions. And it was when I was under your tutelage at Deer Valley Unified that I began to make some of those changes.
Yeah, but in my remembrance of things, and so like I said, trying to get the audience used to who you are, I kind of remember you, I guess it was around the late 90s, you started appearing on the judging circuit in Arizona. And really first it was for marching band, I think. And I said that part of this is just trying to remember who you were, because we met later. And then after that, we'll talk about how your differences that you made on the Arizona band directors onto the area circuit for concert bands. So you started off in marching band, but how did you get more involved with the marching band? Or what did you do to get involved in the Arizona system? How did you come to be, I guess is what we're looking for.
Well, actually going back to the early 90s, the very first thing I did was concert adjudication. Dr. Mike Wilson asked if I could do some. And that led to my taking over the position of the festival coordinator for ABODA, for Arizona Band and Orchestra Directors Association. So I was a concert adjudicator before I was a field adjudicator. And then the field adjudication, you are correct, it was probably mid-90s, 95, 96, somewhere in there, that I began doing the field adjudication.
So what happened to me in my version of things is you started to become an adjudicator, and then you started working with the program over in the northwest side of Phoenix. You started working with Mountain Ridge High School Band, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then what I noticed is because I ended up in Deer Valley for the weirdest set of circumstances. It was an accidental job, which is another story for another day. But I ended up in Deer Valley Unified School District, and you were helping out at the sister school. And I think you were just literally volunteering as a parent at that time. But you were had you already started this adjudication journey?
Yes, I was. Matter of fact, one of the things that I was thinking about today getting ready to talk with you is something that you've already said, and that's that learning to be an adjudicator made me a better band director. And that happened in California. In California, there is a really formal process for becoming an adjudicator. And I went through what they call the apprentice program for both concert and for parade competition, which is a huge thing. And that preceded field competition in California.
I wanted to say to everyone that's watching the studios, if you have never ever watched California parade bands, you need to go search them out and put on some headphones. You are in for some of those bands. It sounds like a concert band coming down the street, and as it gets closer, it just keeps sounding better. But you really need to take Google some California bands on the marching circuit on the parade side. It is fantastic. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah, it's life-changing.
Yeah, that's Google the West Arcadia Band Review, and that's where the best of the best go around the middle of November. And I actually parade competition was my entry into the idea of preparing a group for a performance, for an evaluation. And in California, there are two music judges, and they both have scores to the march as you go through the competition zone. So the idea of preparing something for assessment has been part of what I've done since forever. So after I left California education, I was with National Corporation for about 10 years. And then we moved here to Arizona, and both of my daughters were students at Mountain Ridge. My oldest daughter, Randy, was, I think, in the second class at Mountain Ridge. That band still met in an English classroom. And we just, Bruce Duplanty, who was the original director there and did such a wonderful job of putting that program on the map, first year teacher, and I had been already through my career in Southern California, so I had some information that could help him. So I just acted as a volunteer and kind of helped him with the load, because the load got pretty serious pretty fast. By about the third year, we were total 100 students in two bands. Then the following year, it went to 212.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, and that was the year that all of our bands became standalone, and I kind of took over the lead for the third band and helped Bruce with the top band, and we kind of co-taught the second band. It was just an awesome time, because the kid, they're exceptional kids. They still are. I still go to Mountain Ridge once a week at the invitation of Aaron Vogel, who I guess you're going to see a couple of weeks from now.
Yep.
And I've spent a lot of time in that band room, and there have been some great music made in there because of the kids. The kids are just special. Many of them are teachers now. We've got the cooks and, just a bunch of people who are now music educators. And we were fortunate to have them as students at Mountain Ridge.
Yeah, well, that goes back to defining what this culture is, because Mountain Ridge is interesting. Mountain Ridge opened in 1995, I believe, but there has been like 0 years where it hasn't been awesome. And I think that culture is still holding today. I mean, they're the last 2 years, they've won the State Marching Festival Championship. They've been to National Festival for Music for All, National Concert Band Festival just last year. And just, anytime I see Aaron's band currently, it was always that worry. And all of us have this worry. When you leave a band program, what's going to be like after you leave? And even, vice versa, when you take over a band program and it's of that caliber, what are you going to do to keep it that way? So this goes back. I said, I got a little bit more conversation before I'm going to start accessing that amazing brain. And those of you in the audience, I hope you're out there asking some questions, because I'm telling you, I got some questions. I'll ask this gentleman. He'll know flat off the top of his head that I'm still trying to learn to this date. But okay, so let's try this. You retired in what year was it? 2017? 2017. Right. So let's try this. 2017, just roughly. How many concert bands have you heard in Arizona by 2017? About, the rough percentage of how many concert bands have you listened to up to 2017?
Yeah, I think if you were to use an average of 75 to 80 a year, you'd be really close. So
Yeah. How many?
since, yeah,
Keep going. I'm sorry.
since that's all right, since 1994-ish
Yeah. And how many
to
are you
now.
listening to now? I mean, you're still judging, I would assume.
Yeah, I just finished 2 weeks, and yeah, it's just been consistent since the time I got here.
Yeah, I would say this: if a band is going to festival in the state of Arizona, there is a rare chance that you have not heard it. Is that correct?
I think that's fair. I don't think there are
Uh,
many bands I haven't heard. Yeah.
so let's try this. Let's go all the way back to 1994. How much of the bands in Arizona changed since you showed up? Because go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to ask the question too much.
Well, no, that's okay. I think there has been a huge change in the bands in Arizona. And I think that, well, to give you an example, when I first moved here, one of my first heroes was Mike Wilson at McClintock High School. Mike had an old style symphonic band. It was 85 to 90 kids playing, just with tremendous sonority and tremendous fingers and all the things that you want. And he was kind of the last of that era. And then as kids changed and as culture changed, then he, like the rest of us, had to have a wind ensemble in order to get his best players all in one place. The thing that I have noticed the most, and from my time in listening to all those bands, is a little bit more awareness of some of the things that got away from them early, and that, pitch, blend, balance, those kinds of things. It was there were a lot of really above average performances, but they kind of, as you said, loud and proud. There were just a lot of reliance on volume, and I think we're working our way through that. So that finding a way to pay off a phrase without volume is one of the keys to musicality for me. And if you can pay off a phrase with a change in tempo or some kind of manipulation of the dissonance, in a cadence, now we're headed toward musicality instead of just right notes.
All right, so now we're going to get started with the process because, ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, the man shaped concert bands in Arizona, and also, more importantly, you shaped how different marching bands sound in Arizona. And last little plug here, he took over at the high school I used to teach at, and within his third year, had won the Arizona State Championship for 2A bands. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, and the way his band, and he had the highest scoring music performance band at the time, even with the second class. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, it was. And I said, if you ever find recordings of these things, go find them. All right, so let's start with this, Dave Kuhns. So I'm Dave Kuhns. I'm taking over a high school band program, and you can even do a middle school band program. You walk in the door. How does David build the culture to get his band to not only rehearse, but let's start with the culture of what would you do to start your band program?
Well, I think one of the biggest mistakes that people who take over programs make is not realizing there's a culture already there. It may not be the culture you want, but it's there. And at least for me, having changed jobs 3 times in my career, in California and then a couple of times here, the goal became to change the least amount possible at the beginning, to establish credibility with the kids so that they would trust that what I told them that was different was based on my knowledge of it being truth. And they would, they had to have some kind of buy-in before we could do those things. So whenever I do in-services for band directors who are going to take over new programs, one of the things I say is honor what's there and change the least amount possible. If you come in and try and change a bunch of stuff, all you're going to get is pushback, and they'll never know whether you know what you're doing or not.
As I tell people, you might win the battle of what you're trying to accomplish, but you're going to lose the war of trying to keep kids in your program, and they might not believe in you. So now let's go beyond that. So David Kuhns, first rehearsal. Are we doing high school or middle school? I'll let you pick today.
Let's do high school.
All right. So we're doing high school. Dave Kuhns is ready to start his rehearsal. What is the first thing that you are going to pass out to them? Let's say we've gotten through the introductions. I'm starting like musically speaking, because I'm just going to assume, ladies and gentlemen, if you trust me when I say this, if Dave Kuhns gets to festival in March, it's going to be like straight ones on everything. And let's say you just take over an average program. What are you passing out?
So you were talking about taking over a program. The very first thing I passed out at Deer Valley was a chorale, and in the key of most of the music that we were playing. So we just started working with tonalities, and working with these notes are great on your instrument, these aren't so great on your instrument, and just kind of from the beginning making it kind of a technical approach to how we get the best possible sounds. One of the only big adjustment that I had to make at Deer Valley was turning the drum line down, because they were really, really solid drum line. I mean, Jesse Mitchell did such a great job with the drum line. And I remember the night we were in band camp, and I remember the night that I just asked percussion, play half that loud. And we were inside at the time. And it just completely changed the sound of the band, obviously. And that was the beginning of the process.
Oh, can I comment on that? Hey, shout out to Jesse Mitchell, because he was my student teacher, come to find but he was amazing. But part of this, and I'm going to keep interpreting for my version of how you do things. If you can't hear every instrument, you can't hear the band. And if you can, and the percussion is a part of that band, and they're not band versus percussion. It is all sounds must be represented in your sound concept. That's
correct. Everything's got to get to the audience, and and sometimes that's a function of blend and balance. Sometimes it's a function of intonation. Sometimes it's just a function of confidence in the section. But I always look for clarity in the ensemble, and it took us probably a little longer than they wanted to get there. But once they got there, they really understood what we were after. And it was just straight up from there. And the only other thing I would say with Deer Valley, one thing I told the leadership was, give me 6 weeks. And don't, just trust me for 6 weeks. I'm not going to do anything silly. But please don't say the 7 famous words. We've never done it that way before. So, and by the time we got through that 6 weeks, and they could hear the difference and they could feel the difference, and rehearsals were different than what they were, then it was just all straight up the success road after that. And it was to the point where I gave that year, I gave all the seniors the Outstanding Senior Award, because they had the most to lose by not buying into what I had to offer. And I'm thankful to this day that they did buy in, because it was way more than I could have expected.
So what are the things that you expect every kid to be able to do in your band at this point? Like I know part of like what is your warm-up process, but what is part of how did you build some of those expectations besides those things?
Well, one of the things that I mentioned earlier that I did wrong for all those years is that I couldn't wait to start rehearsing the band, because I figured my job was really to make the world safe for Holst, so I had to get in there and start cleaning things up. But what I came to the conclusion was I was teaching it wrong, because the kids needed to be able to make some of the decisions that I'm telling them on their own. Otherwise, this is going to be a process that just takes forever. So I really started thinking about the music education as language education rather than music education. So while repetition is important, so is the ability to autonomously decode. And you and I have had this discussion a bunch of times, that the biggest mistake I made was not teaching kids to read rhythms on sight. And once I began doing that, using the world famous sight reading factory 5 minutes a day, it changed everything. I mean, the whole equation changed to the point where I no longer had to spend my time convincing kids what the rhythm went, how the rhythm went. They already knew it because we'd been there before. So that was the first change. So the second part of your question is starting a rehearsal, the first 20 minutes of all of my rehearsals, with a few exceptions, were pedagogical. And it was scales and arpeggios and chorales and sight reading and all this stuff that you would want kids to do at home if they were practicing. And that's one of the major differences in my career, is the change in kids. When I first started, way back in California, way back, it was a different kind of kid. They were much more willing to take individual risks. There was a sense of altruism in that they practiced because the person next to them practiced. In order to not, it's the same, I'm sure, ethic we took to rehearsals when we were in college. So once I got here, though, kids had changed to the point where we couldn't count on the fact that they were going to practice. So rather than, signing practice journals and doing all those kinds of things that maybe used to be part of the process, I just started practicing for them the first 20 minutes. And I made sure that the stuff that they did was the stuff that was going to help them get better quickly. So scales, arpeggios, sight reading, all the things that you would expect. And what's interesting about that is you're talking about building culture.
Yes.
The kids got into the idea that the whole point of band was improving. That every day when you come in, let's make something better. And as a result, the kids took a lot more ownership of their personal responsibility issues, and it all contributed to their concert success and their marching success.
What kind of structure do you have? Did you have how did you put your chair structure together? Like, did you have auditions and you sat the kids, or they perform thing you? How do you put those decisions together first? Because that's another question that even I have, because sometimes we do it because we know who's the best, and sometimes we do it to earn, so to speak.
Yeah, I used to do the old way was what you described. I'd audition and make a big deal out of the chairs and all that. And I think the people who went to Deer Valley would tell you when I was there that I just set them. There was no audition. I watched them every day. And because I was evaluating on a regular basis as far as their success for owning the pedagogy, there really wasn't much discussion about who belonged where, because the kids knew.
And that's something I inherited. Either I figured it out because I grew up in your chair placement culture. But when I became a band director, it just I don't know why it happened, but it just turned into, you go here. And then the thing that I have fought, and maybe we can talk about this, the only thing I've ever fought is when I come in new and it takes a few years before this process. But there always seems to be a culture that first is best. And I'm from the culture that I need all the parts represented in the part. That's just a number. And sometimes it's range. And if you're a trombone player, it's flip flop. You're fighting to play lower as opposed to playing higher, so to speak. So then it just took a while to translate. So how do you speak to bands where that's, it is that culture, but you end up, again, you talk about pyramid of sound. Some of these people end up accidentally creating the pyramid on placement. Cause I said, I'm much a bigger fan of placing the kids where they go, and then shared responsibility. Like if you're a first clarinet, you might be a second clarinet on another tune. I make my kids get up on stage and they just flip flop, my poor trumpets. They just have to move because everyone gets a part, and I don't want only these kids playing first. However, I do want my all-state oboe player playing first, maybe all the time. I guess, how do you speak to those people out there whose chair representation might not balance their band?
This is sort of built into the approach that I've developed, in the last part of my career, which was not only did we do pedagogy, but we held the kids accountable. So everybody in the band, or in whichever band it was in, played in front of everybody else once a week, and for me, for live feedback. It went, and it was just something we did. Nobody made a big deal about it. We just did it, and they got instant feedback. And because we did that, my point was going to be to get to the back of the section in the clarinets or the lower part of the trumpets. They knew they were going to be held responsible. So there was more motivation there than just coming to class and filling the chair. And then before long, people could see that somebody who was sitting, maybe fifth chair trumpet got moved up to third. And, because we would be assigning parts and I'd ask them to play it, and they began to figure it out. So I think the biggest part of the pedagogy for me, the key to it was the accountability. I wanted to hear kids play.
So I was reading again, I read Facebook a lot just because, and probably shouldn't respond so much because sometimes you just go, I've got to put my thing out there. Really, I should probably just keep quiet. But somebody was saying that, if you test your kids on scales, they're going to quit band. And then my poor brain went, I don't think that's true. And I think this is why I wanted to bring you on today. Because, your culture is set, not necessarily, I think you changed my own habit of practice in band. Don't practice at home, because the kids that practice at home are going to do that anyway. So you're just going to make it, it's still going to create the system as long as you make time for it. So what do you say to a band director that says, if you teach scales in band, the kids are going to quit?
It's what I like to call wrong. It at least in my experience, I never saw that where somebody just said, no, I don't want to, I don't want to do this. I'm just going to leave. I always tried to kind of shape everything in to give them a why for what we were doing. And, if to use the metaphor that we're actually teaching a language, you get spelling tests every week, you get vocabulary tests every week. And in our case, that's what these are. And, when they're not going to be big productions, you're going to play a B flat concert scale for me, 1 octave up and down, and it's going to take about 10 seconds. And you get immediate feedback, and that's that.
And you say all the right things, because I started doing some of this, in preparing for you. It's just you are a kind of a reminder. Oh yeah, I need to hear every kid. The culture for kids to play 1-to-1, even down to my lowest band. You're correct. It takes one time and it's fine. And I always say start in a safe place, because that's, again, part of the culture is having a safe place to do what it is that you're trying to do. So I call it, don't make fun of me, but I call it the scale. So, hey kids, can you play the scale for me? And then oddly, they all play concert B flat without knowing, and they don't even talk about it. They just do. And so some of these things pedagogically that I've learned is, first week of school, test your kids to see if the tongue is making contact with the reed. Test your kids to see if embouchure. But let's get to the characteristic tone thing, because that is the words that you changed me. I will attribute you 90% of why my band got to Midwest, because as soon as those words popped in my head of like the right way to say it, it made sense. Because there's characteristic tone for jazz, there's characteristic tone for classical, there's characteristic tone in whatever you do, in whatever idiom you try. And so, and my assumption of this, so when you talk, I see this. We're going to talk with Jennifer York's question. Patrick, bring that up in just a second. When you talk about character tone, let's just can you go through the band? Like, what are some of the expectations or things that come to mind? Like when you hear flute, what's characteristic tone? Clarinet, trumpet, brass, or woodwinds, or percussion? Can you discuss your version of that word, characteristic tone?
Yeah, and it's without, I'm not trying to evade the question, but it's a truthful answer. It's when you hear a characteristic sound, it is. And it could be because you've heard enough of great players to know what it's supposed to sound like. It could be a lot of different reasons, but one of the beauty of this, the weekly assessment is that we weren't just testing the scales. A lot of the feedback was on tone quality, the use of air, articulation. All of those things were built in. So it was like a Swiss Army knife. We could use it for a bunch of different things. And all we were really trying to do is to get them to get to the point of muscle memory on their scales. I should make the point that I often hear when I talk about this in services and things, well, what about the kid who is stage fright, the kid who is so paranoid about playing in public? And I would tell you what my solution for that was. And that's the very first time we do it. If they were in that position, I would ask them to come play for me in the office, and they'd play by themselves. And we'd do the same process we would have done in front of everybody had they been out there. Then the second time, they have to bring another person with them, and I get to choose somebody, so that we're desensitizing them to the idea of other people being in the room. And the honest answer is I never got past that level with anybody. Once we got to the bring in the other person, then it was, yeah, I'll just do it in front. That's fine.
Hey, Patrick, can you bring up Jennifer's question, please? I saw it go by really quick. Please give some examples of what they would play for each other.
The short
play in front
answer,
of each other.
yeah. And when I wrote a thing I call Warm Up 1, which is a combination of scales, the tonic, dominant, arpeggio, broken thirds, and basically an etudinal study in each key. And the kids were responsible for being able to show mastery on each one of those sections. So there was a scale of the week, or sometimes it took us a couple of weeks to get through, but the kids would play the broken thirds, or they'd play, the etude study, and they would just play in front of other people. And I think that's it.
Was the etude study the scalular study? Da 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 da.
Yeah.
Or did you have a different? Yeah. So
no, it was that.
Yeah, and I always tell people, these are things that you can write out for yourself. It does. I mean, I know I have all of Dave Kuhns warm-ups that I've used with my kids. I've even wrote accompaniment tracks so that my kids can work on intonation for them at the time. Did you know that? Did you know I've written actual?
No, I didn't know that.
I should share them with you sometime. Hey, Ann Hanfler, how do you deal with unbalanced instrumentation? Great question.
That is a great question. Fortunately, because of it could be luck, it could be a bunch of things. I never really had to address lots of deficits to the point where we were talking about how are we going to make this sound presentable. But the short answer is that if I didn't have horns, I switched some kids. If I didn't have tubas, I switched some kids. And there was never a year where there weren't 4 to 5 kids who were switching to double reeds, or switching to tuba, or switching to horns, just because if we didn't do that, they weren't going to be there. So rather than complain about not getting them, I just made that part of my gig, and we're gonna switch.
Yeah, I'm gonna translate for some smaller school versions of it, because when some of the programs where you have only 8 or 9 kids, I always say focus on blend as opposed to balance, and teach the kids that are there versus those who are not, and you will have a successful event. So you might not have the lower voices in that band that you have. Go out and produce amazing characteristic tone sounds on all your instruments and let that magic happen. And then do your best to convince kids, or for me, if you only have one sax player in your band, maybe think about asking them to play Barry instead of alto, and let your clarinet player cover the middle and those things. But again, there's no magic answer, in my opinion, for finding those answers, but we all have our way. And I said, I'm the same way. If I don't have a particular instrument, I'm going to find one. I thought about this with my own program. I was so worried about having kids in my jazz program my first year, because I had 7 seniors and 3 nothing. And then by the next year I had 35 kids in jazz, because I put attention to it. And I think it's what becomes my culture becomes this kid's culture. So let's keep going on. And I want to talk about a big question. And there's no way we're going to have time for this, because you all need to keep those questions coming. Dave can answer any question, I guarantee it. So here goes. Programming. I think that is one of the. Oh, I like the smile, Dave. I never see those. Programming. Let's just start with, what is your advice on programming?
Well, that was one of my road to Damascus experiences. and that's that programming is tied to pedagogy, and pedagogy is tied to programming. And it's not a decision of, well, let's play Armenian dances. It's, well, I'd like to play Armenian dances, but we can't play it yet. So how am I going to get them from where they are now to Armenian dances? And one of the best things I ever heard from, the few in-services, general in-services that we went to as teachers, was reverse engineering. That, if you, in any class, if you want the kids to be someplace they're not, then you have to figure out how to get them there. So I would construct my pedagogy, my daily scales, for example, around where I wanted them to head. We would do something in between. For example, you do the Balmages Arabian dances as to deal with those kinds of scales, to introduce that concept. and then use that as a scaffolding piece to move into Armenian dances. So I guess the short answer is I don't view programming as a function of what I want to play. It's programming is what do I need to teach the kids in order to get them to the point where they can play it. Because let's face it, there's some great literature that you just have to prepare for. And the more of that they do, the more they enjoy band, the more fun it is to go to festival. There's this kind of spiral that happens, when it's not casual, the decision about programming. And one other point. And the other point, I used to program based on what my kids could play then. And that's stasis. They don't go anywhere after that. It's just, well, I got to hope that something gets better next year. So as soon as I made the decision to tie pedagogy and programming together, then that's how Armenian dances and all those things happen.
Well, then I'm going to take this moment to use my band as the example. So what do I have a problem with right now? One, my band is playing with some fantastic characteristic tone right now. Since you came out, we sight read the Pops concert, which is only for a little bit because we're going to solo and ensemble next. We're going to do all that playing in front of kids stuff. So what have I come up with? You can actually speak to this because you've heard my band, but now I have this thing where now that I hear my band, I need to work on technique and skill and compression of rhythm and technical passages. So, let's say this, Dave, because how many times have I called you, text you, hey, David, can you give me some recommendations to play? How many times would you say it? Or
let's say more than once.
Yeah, let's just say every time I program, I'm calling you and saying, hey, what's this? And I don't ever do a march without your approval. So let's go with that. So my band is suffering from we're a good grade 4 band. That's where we are at. And by the way, if you're in Washington, I'm a 2A school. So by the way, David, that means I'm about the same size as Snowflake in Arizona. I'd be the largest 3A high school in Arizona. Okay. So my band's we've got to the point where I've got them practicing. They sound great. They're listening across the ensemble. I have zero question. But man, my technique needs an uptick, and we're doing scales. We're doing thirds. We're up to 7 key centers, and we're going to finish the other 5 because that's how much room we have left in the year. But what are some good programming things for now that you've heard my band? What would you suggest my band play here in the future, knowing that they're a grade 4, but they're struggling with technique and compressed rhythm?
There are an awful lot of suites that come to mind where you get to address a lot of those things at once. One of the underplayed masterpieces is the Hebrides suite, the Grunman. There's soloistic playing, there's some technical articulation, some really fun keys that kind of reinforces the idea of why we learn scales. I'm a real fan of West Highland Sojourn, and that, you having played Sheldon, why I'm a fan of his stuff.
It's on my desk, oddly, that you say that. I found it like last week.
Yeah. One of my favorite to develop low brass from Sheldon is called Choreography. It doesn't get played very much, but it's a dead 4 and just so much fun to play. And kids develop so many strong techniques when they play it. I should make one other point about when you mentioned that your kids need technical work. That is a true statement. But the mistake that a lot of directors make, including me, was that when we learn scales, I wouldn't tie it to the music. So now the step that comes after learning the scale is when we pass the music out, I ask the group to go through and identify scale segments. And then that's any diatonic passage with 4 or more notes in it. And they got to be able to tell me what the key center is. And whether they get the right key center is not important as long as it fits what their fingers need to do. So if it's actually in F and they say that based on the snapshot they see, they think it's in C, I don't care. As long as they are making that connection between, my fingers need to do this because I've played that fragment before when I learned these scales. So, the warm-up was based with the idea that if you can play all these things and all these keys, you can play about 85% of the literature that you're going to be asked to play.
Amazing. So now I'm going to put you, I'm going to keep asking questions that I put you on the spot, but not really, because I know you just know the answers to things. So how important are marches to you?
Oh, they're critical. You talk about compressing rhythms. That's nothing teaches a band to play time faster than a march. It's just it's intrinsic to the art form.
So I was talking to a band. I clinic this week on Tuesday. And then I actually got to finally I clinic a band that played a march, and I got to go to the trio section. Can you guess what I was talking about when I got to the trio section about the things that you talked about today that I was able to use in that clinic? That was it was like it was revolutionizing for this band program because I was able to set the whole band. Can you guess what I was working on? I'm just curious.
Well, when I work on it, I'm hoping it's the same stuff I would work on, and that's that the trio is both a stylistic contrast and a dynamic contrast. That the phrases are longer here than they are in the other places of the march, and more. And the other thing that a lot of people never think about is that they're written usually vertically. That the harmony, and a great exercise I would suggest is you take any march and have the kids play the note they have on the first beat of the march, on the first beat of the trio, the first beat. Then they play the first beat of the second measure and the first beat of the third measure, and it's an instant chorale.
Aha. Uh-huh. That is exactly what I did. And not only did it, this is one of the things talking to my audience about building the culture. Like there's a reason I do a march every concert. And I learned half of this from you, but the ability to put that trio together, the ability to put that chorale together, and then balance, blend, everything, intonation, everything is in that trio. And that's why I do those. And the kids actually love the trios now because it becomes like, ooh, what's the chorale that's going to come out of this one? So we have Kalila who's asking on the adverse side of that, how do you get students to play well lyrically? Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, well, and it's funny. I just worked with a junior high this week that had that problem, and the one thing that solved it was I asked them to start at a place, let's say this measure, and they had to go to this measure, and they couldn't stop the air. They had to play everything with one breath, and the air had to be moving all the time. That's the one thing that especially young players forget is that if they breathe too often or they don't support the sound, that it affects their ability to play lyrically. So playing legato is the first step. So if we can get them to play legato, then we can teach kids the lyric part, which is adding shaping then. So that very, very rarely will I play the dynamics as written in a trio of a march, because the dynamics are often suggested by the shape of the melody in the trio. So we'll add a crescendo here, a diminuendo there. We'll play this. We'll play up to this level and stay there for 16 counts and then diminuendo. But the important part is for them to know that this is where we get to show real musicality when we're performing a march. Because the trio is it. I always tell them it's the marches are like an overture without the time change, because there's always going to be, most always going to be a key change. There's going to be a stylistic change. So we get to do everything in about 3 minutes that we would do in a 9-minute overture, except slow down.
Okay, because I'm going to start. Here's the scary part, Dave. We've been talking for 48 minutes, and I have no desire to end the show. But so we're going to go a few more minutes because I actually have other things to ask you that are not this pedagogy. So, ladies and gentlemen, especially those of you listening, make sure you find out this gentleman's email address and send him an email. If you have like DW Kuhns, so it's DWKUHNS at gmail.com, DWKuhns@gmail.com. This man will answer any question at any time. And this man is test him out. It's kind of fun. But here goes, David. I'm going to take us a little journey. Thank you for coming, and we're not leaving. Thank you for coming to the show to share some of this, because it is my belief that even though we talked about rehearsal strategies, the scales, there's a picture, it is that culture that has made at least me personally successful. Is the culture you talked about today is everything to me that I'm trying to instill, and it just takes time. But every time you walk into a band program, that culture is there within a quarter. So I advise everyone to take a thought bubble about how do I get my bands where I need to be, and maybe today is just the start of that process. So David, I'm going to start challenging you, because I think I texted you this week. Why doesn't David Kuhns have like a place to go where David Kuhns could listen to your band anytime. Like, for example, by the way, I'm going to tell you this, the thing about this. I had David Kuhns out on Zoom. And other than some bandwidth issues, I finally got my microphone to work with Zoom so that there was not much latency and he was able to hear my band and rehearse my band. So that's kind of started this thought process in my head. So people like you, David, and it doesn't have to be just you. Why don't we think about creating a network of teachers like you where we could send recordings of our band and get feedback? What do you think about that?
I think it's a great idea. And it obviously, when I was a young band director, we didn't have the technology that would support that. So we used to send cassette tapes around and do exactly what you're talking about doing. But the short answer to your question is that I never really considered it in the context of, my being able to do that for other people on a regular basis until you mentioned it. It's just, I just
I'm going to bring up my festival, which, by the way, I'm judging my own festival, sort of. The Beaverton schools adopted the festival I created, which is you have to go twice and you have to kind of pay attention to what was given to you in the fall. And then the expectations are that they're in the spring, but it's not like you have to follow it. That's what it's, again, festivals are supposed to give you PLC advice. Here's what's going on in your band program, because it's not the song that you played at the festival. Well, we're playing different kids or it's different music. That's not the point. The what you do in the past usually is what you do in the future, and trying to make personal changes is all that festival is. So I'm trying to think at you, Dave, and kind of like talking to everyone else at the same time about thinking about maybe we should all be sending you our recordings in the fall and the spring, and or anybody like you and other people should think about this idea too, that you're getting advice that are you hearing a difference? What are my next steps? Because I think that's where I am in my life in being a band director. Here's where I am. What are my next steps? Because every time we do that, I figure it pays off on the next thing.
Yeah. And the short answer to that is that there, within 20 miles of anybody, there are 4 or 5 people who have fresh ears who are going to do you some good. And just the idea of having somebody else listen to your band that's not you is it's a risky step, but it's so necessary to have other people give you feedback, or you're not going to grow. I do want to mention about the festival that you created, though. I think that single event, that single recurring event, had more impact musically on the musical culture in Deer Valley than anything else, because it's now twice a year we're going to play for a panel, and it's awesome.
You've judged every one of them, I believe. Like, I think
I've several. Yeah.
And to my audience listeners, my superintendent, unbeknownst to me, took my festival and made it their goal, so that my festival results and the data from my festival ended up being contingent upon their success. And it kind of scared me because they chose not to tell me that till it was done. So if they would have told me that when it happened, that's how much I believe in the power of growth. And I said, and I talked to Scott Lang a few weeks ago. So if you want to go back and listen to the Scott Lang episode, audience, you should, because it really is on this topic. But David, I'm going to encourage you to think about this, because if anything you've taught me is that I have access to you, but not everyone does. But there is somebody just like you everywhere. And so, listening to bands and getting feedback. Have I grown? Listening bands and clinicking. Have I grown? Clinicking live, clinicking via recording. We have so many options. And now that you're retired, and I know you have some other retired friends that would be amazing for this, you really should think about making that a culture and a place for bands, because then they can take that and take it to their next festivals or their next clinics. And for small bands out there, I think this is an amazing way that you could, save money on traveling that you might not have, and just find some of those aspects.
Well, I think I often make the point to my student teachers, or did when I had student teachers, that becoming a band director is really like it's not artistic. It's like being a plumber. You have to apprentice. There are so many things that you have to learn. And somewhere there is somebody who can teach you how to do that. It could be your master teacher. It could be somebody who teaches oboe in the same district, but you're going to get the information if you ask for it. So one of the things I told them was never go anywhere without a yellow pad, and just, start asking questions. But the answers are there. We just have to ask for the help. And that, I think there is, at least there was, I'm not sure there still is, there was a stigma about having other people listen to your group if you didn't think your group was super performance ready. But that's how you get there. You got to let somebody hear what they sound like when they're not at their best.
Yeah, and but those poor schools that were so resistant when we started, and they were getting, three, so to speak. Yeah, it didn't last long, did it? And some of them actually proved all the way to superiors because this is a we culture, my friends out there in the audience. It is not an I culture, and I had to learn that. I had to learn that I am not the reason my band is successful. We are the reason that my band's successful, and I don't think I really have any words of originality. I just take what I learned from the masters and move forward. So, Dave Kuhns. What is your final thought for the audience out there? This is your final shot to talk to anyone on anything.
Well, my final thought is just to make the case for that if you're going to build a culture in your classroom on anything, build it on improvement, and that it's not about whether or not you can play perfectly today. It's what are you doing to get better. And all of the in-person assessment that I did with the bands were always positive. And just because we did not worry about perfection, we worried about perfect intent. I don't care I don't care whether they play perfectly. I just want them to show me that they're trying to play perfectly. And if kids want to succeed, and if you give them a place to succeed, the culture will keep them there. If we were talking about retention, I'm sure the trips to California are important, and sure all of the social things that kids are that are important to them, you should do. But that's not the reason kids stay. Kids stay because they feel like they're accomplishing something and are part of something that's bigger than they are.
Well, Dave, I hope to talk to you again or have you on again in the future because I always get to like 2% of what I intend to get to. But as you can see, it goes super, super fast. So thank you for coming today.
It's my pleasure. Good to have a reason to think about these things again.
Well, good to have you on. Thanks, Dave. All righty, kids. Thank you for contributing to our culture, everyone. There was a lot more questions today. And Dave, I'm not kidding. Email him, send him a recording of your band. Say, what do you think? But I want to say, I'm not going to talk too much today because it's already been almost an hour. But next week, I am looking so forward to this. Are you teacher of a small band? Next week's show is for you. We have Rachel Lake from Ilwaco, Washington. 50% of her school is in her music program. And I want to know why. She's got about 300 plus kids in her high school portion. And this woman is a pure dynamo. She's the leader of the small school cohort that I'm in. As I say to her, I'm a small school. I'm not a small school. But I just want to say, please come next week and please come every week and contribute to our culture. So goodbye. And thanks everyone. See you next week.